even late in development, especially with the new podcast. You talk a lot about how it changed,
Yep.
even really late. How static has Infinite been?
Unfortunately, we're no better at like knowing exactly what we're doing at the very beginning than we were when we did Bioshock. I mean, the notion of this. I mean, you saw probably a lot of in the demo today and some in the trailer. The sort of the city of Columbia being, centered around the sort of notion of American exceptionalism. That didn't even exist until like 6 or 8 months ago. It was a city in the sky from the very beginning. But very similar to Bioshock 1, where we didn't have Andrew Ryan and we didn't have the whole notion of objectivism. We leave ourselves very open for evolution. We still leave ourselves open for evolution, even after we show the game the first time, because we like to, when we build these demos, and they teach us things about what we're making. We don't just work from a design document. It's just not our way.
Bioshock had a strong philosophical influence, like you said, objectivism. You see a lot of the same things in Infinite. What's the philosophy behind it? What would be a good reading guide if you're going to tell someone to get caught up?
I mean, I think that there is there's a period of time, and Bioshock 1 was also, it wasn't historical, but it was sort of set in the context of history. It was based upon this period of time, and it informed, there was a feeling in America which we were trying to represent, or feeling in the world even, and very much the same here. In the turn of the century, there was this feeling of optimism, this feeling of all these technologies came in place in this period of 20 years. You go from people with cows and outhouses and growing wheat in the fields to they got radios and cars and movie stars and all these incredible things in the space of 20 years. It's almost as if they felt like a city was suddenly floating in the sky. That's how much the world changed. And so there's a lot of books you can read. I mean, I've read books on, I think Teddy Roosevelt is a great place to start. He really is the center of where America was at the time, and America's role from being this sort of small provincial power to placing itself on the world stage. This feeling of optimism, we can do all these huge things. We have the technology, we have this incredible democratic system, which was really a beacon of hope at the time of the world. It was a world full of monarchies and despots. And Columbia came out of that. And what we really wanted to sort of base something in that time, which people haven't really seen before, but I think also feels in a lot of ways very familiar to some things that that are very much in our consciousness today.
So Columbia, it's a big part of the presentation today. Your games historically have had the settings of the major characters, the Von Braun in System Shock 2, Rapture in Bioshock. Going into designing Infinite, was building that locale, was that an early part of the inception of Infinite?
We knew we wanted a city in the sky because we knew that feeling of, oh my God, that's what they thought would happen at the time, at the turn of the century. They thought, in the same way that, Bioshock 1, there was a sense of, in Bioshock 1 there was a sense that you could create these utopias, you can create these perfect worlds based upon these, quite radical systems of ideas. There was a sense that America had this mission at the time. And so but even aside from the American aspect, there was a sense of technology would transform everything, because it was transforming everything. So this notion of putting this almost a ridiculous concept, but probably no more ridiculous than a city at the bottom of the sea, maybe even less ridiculous. A city, suspended in the clouds, struck us as a great sort of visual metaphor for certain ideas. So that was fairly early. That was almost right at the start. But everything else has been just evolving ever since.
So this has been a while since Bioshock, right? It's 3 years since Bioshock's release this month. And I assume the game is not coming out this year, so you're talking about another year. In terms of team size, in terms of dev budget, how does Infinite compare to Bioshock? Is this a far bigger project?
No, I mean, it's a reasonably big team, and we're still not as big as like the Ubisofts of the world, not even close. We don't have 350 people. We've got like 80 or 90 people. So we like to stay relatively small. But yeah, relatively. Not compared to a bunch of indies, which are do amazing things with 5 people, and we used to do that. But the scale of this project is obviously very large, and the amount of assets. There's not a single shared asset between this and any previous Bioshock game. All the code we're writing is entirely new. We're not using any of the code we used in Bioshock 1 or 2. It's an entirely new engine. And the reason we did that is we wanted, Rapture was a bit of a fake in the sense that you never really engaged with the ocean in any real way. And that was sort of a function of the engine we had and the time we had to make it. And I think some people, with some justification, criticized us for that. And we said when we did the city, if we're going to do a city in the sky, it has to be in the sky. In our engine, the buildings actually float. The buildings can actually collapse out of the sky. The buildings you're standing on can actually collapse out of the sky. Any surface is every surface is floating. The scale of the spaces, the fact that you can fight, you saw some of the battles against like 15 guys at once, where you're used to in a Bioshock game fighting 1 or 2 guys in a corridor. We have this saying when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and that's why some of the combats I think in previous Bioshock games got to be a tiny bit samey, because when you're just fighting 1 or 2 guys in a tight corridor, electrobolt shotgun tends to work really, really well. And we want to say, well, first thing we want to do is really open up the kinds of challenges you can face. Okay, well, maybe you will have some of those tight spaces. You will. You saw some tonight. Maybe you'll have much broader spaces where all of a sudden long-range weapons become important. Maybe you'll have lots of enemies at once where area of effect weapons become really important. Maybe you'll have moving at 60 miles per hour on the skylines or 80 miles an hour on the skylines where weapons that can actually be used in that context become really important. And so we wanted to demand a lot more of the players, so they were much more had to be much more engaged in their tool set.
A quick question about the engine. You mentioned it's a new engine. The other game was built on a heavily modified Unreal Engine 2.5. Is this fresh tech from ground up?
No, it's built on Unreal 3 this time, okay. but there's no shared code that we wrote between. Right. Well, I guess because it's built on Unreal 3, there's not really any shared code at all between the two. But certainly there's no shared code between what we did on any of our previous games and this. And this game was about. Sorry about that. And this game was about getting out of our comfort zone for us, because we had used that engine on several games before, and it was used on SWAT, it was used on Tribes, it was used on Bioshock 1, it was used on Bioshock 2, somebody else used it on Bioshock 2. And we were very comfortable with it, but it was also a limitation which didn't allow us to do the thing we wanted to do with this game. So, it was a lot of work, and that's one of the reasons here we are 2 years later just starting to talk about it. 2.5 years later starting to talk about it.
That leads us into another question. What were some of the hard choices you had to make with Infinite? Do you have any anecdotes about the concept of the dev process that was specifically difficult, that you either had to avoid or that you wanted to address head on?
I think, the first rule we made for ourselves when working on this game, and this is a hard rule, is that there's no sacred cows. There are no Bioshock sacred cows. Anything that doesn't fit in Bioshock Infinite doesn't belong in Bioshock Infinite. So people say, well, what about this? That's you got to have that in a Bioshock game. And we say, well, how does it fit? Does it fit in? Does it belong? Is it telling the story you want to tell? Is it the gameplay experience you want to say? And there are some probably very iconic things that when you think of Bioshock, you didn't necessarily see tonight. And I think for a lot of people, like, oh my God, how could we not have that?
What's an example? What's an example of something that people said, oh, it has to have this for Bioshock?
Probably didn't see a large guy in a diving suit and a little girl walking around.
There was a big guy with big hands.
That wasn't what you think it was.
Big hand guy.
We have, in terms of the combats, there's a much broader, let me come back around to that again in a second. But that guy was not a big daddy. And you're not seeing any, big guys in diving suits and little girls walking around. And that, for a Bioshock, that's a guy on the cover. That's a little girl on the cover in both games. And I think that's a big thing. When you think of Rapture, that's another key thing. How do you take all these things you created? This, there's such an iconic. Everything about how the game was presented was tied into that. And I think that for us, though, we didn't have a choice in terms of what we wanted to do, because we felt we had said what we wanted to say about Rapture, not about Bioshock, not about sort of the gameplay motifs, not about some of the narrative motifs, but we had said what we wanted to say about Rapture. We had said we wanted to say about that kind of space and the kind of combats you have there, and some of the kind of experiences you have there. But we created this franchise, and we love this franchise, and it's very much, if you know our previous games, it's very much an extension of the DNA of stuff we had done before. And I think you'll see this game has evolved as much from Bioshock as Bioshock had evolved from any previous games we had done. I think Bioshock is a lot more than just Rapture. I think there's motifs of, this is a game, it's a first-person shooter set in an amazing place with a story wrought with, from our perspective, of ideas that are tied to human history. And everything else really is, for us, is up for grabs, but we felt if we made this game and it wasn't a Bioshock game, that really wouldn't be, that would be a bit of a cheat, Like, say, oh, it's a totally new thing, but it is a new thing, but it's also it's a continuation of things we've done before.
It's a shared heritage.
Yes. You know, I mean, Final Fantasy is a very similar thing. You know,
right.
you know, they have some similar elements, but you know, and it's a little strange because usually when you do sequels, you know, the reason it's so similar is because, you know, a lot of the same assets, a lot of the same, you know, a lot of the same gameplay systems, almost
Bioshock
everything.
2, for example, versus Bioshock Infinite.
You know, yes, I mean, this is, and that's why we had, one of the reasons Bioshock 2 wasn't the right project for us, and as we agreed with the company, is that we didn't have the time frame or the scale to make the product the ambition we had. But we felt very much it was a Bioshock game.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there is connective tissue to this and previous titles we've done as well.
What does Infinite mean?
That's something you're going to have to find out.
Oh, I see. Are you concerned at all about disappointing fans that were really looking forward to a new IP from Irrational? You know, do you think that there's going to be a backlash? Like, oh, it's a Bioshock game. Why isn't it just something else?
No, I mean, I think that if we had made a game that was, you know, very similar to what we had done before and tread very similar grounds, I think that there is definitely a chance of that. And look, you know, we never know what people are going to think. But our viewpoint here is that it is a franchise that people like and I think people love. A lot of people love. And we had more to say to it, but we wanted to do it in a way that we weren't bound by any ideas that had come before.
Can you explain the code name, Icarus?
Mostly it was just we wanted to be able to talk about the game and say it without just saying, oh, this thing we're working on, and have a name that we could use. I think it also, I mean, if you think about the name, there's, you know, we wanted people, and I think there are some people on the internet who sort of had a sense of, you know, kind of sussed out a little bit of what we were doing because of the name, and that's okay. We wanted people to, you know, like any good mystery, you want people afterwards to feel they had some information to suss out, you know, what the solution to the mystery would be. They had some data to figure that out.
You guys had a fun podcast feature where people called in, guessed what you were working on. Anybody guess Bioshock in the Sky?
I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe I could be wrong. I'm looking at my director of marketing here.
Some people did. You're gonna give them like a special award, or something, give them a prize.
They should get a prize.
Give them a badge on the site or something.
I mean, the Icarus name is, you know, does hint towards that a little bit.
The game was running on PC today, I think, right? Are you guys handling PC development yourself? No, it was handled by 2K Australia.
We're handling everything.
How about a morality system? It's one of the major components of the first Bioshock game, where you were able to, you know, choose whether or not you wanted to harvest little sisters or not. Is that same type of decision and morality system present in Infinite?
I think that all Bioshock games are set in the context of morality. That there's, you know, they're not games about the bad guys and the good guys. I think that we're not going to talk specifically about, you know, if we're doing anything with that kind of system or what we're doing. I think it's safe to say we're not looking to repeat ourselves there, because we think we've said what we wanted to say with that, and that's been very well expressed in 2 games now. And I think that if we were to do something, it would be quite different.
The city of Columbia seems a lot less devolved than Rapture was. Is this still a city, you know, full of crazies, full of hopped up splicers? People seemed a little more natural.
Well, I think that's one of the things we're trying to do. I mean, one of the cheats we've given ourselves over the history of the company is sort of being in this world which is almost it's almost dead. It's completely destroyed in many ways, and you just have sort of the crazies wandering around who you can't really interact with in any meaningful way. You know, I think, I could be wrong, I think I invented the see the guy on the other side of the glass window and interact with him thing. And that's a dubious distinction as an invention. And that's one of the things we said we're not going to allow ourselves to have a game that's entirely run by that. We're not going to allow ourselves where you see a guy and he immediately attacks you. You saw there's a sequence in the bar you saw where you come in and people don't immediately attack you. And that's actually meaningful to what we're trying to do with this game. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, but this is not a city that's as devolved as Rapture, and I think that presents real challenges for us on the development side, but it also presents real new opportunities for the gamer and a very different experience in a Bioshock game.
So last question, should be really obvious at this point. Bioshock